to another episode of the Heal Your Worldview podcast. I'm your host, James Knight, and this podcast is focused on the connection between your complex trauma that you received in childhood with your current philosophical worldview that you currently have now, and the connections that are in between those two and why they matter. So this podcast is going to go in a lot of different directions, but today we're going to look at couples issues, relationship issues between romantic partners. This should apply to everybody, not just straight sex couples, but any couple in general. It's a little trickier with the non-traditional relationships because those are easier to see patterns in because there's more of them. So with regard to gay marriage and all of those types of relationships, you're going to have to work a little bit more to figure out, how your complex trauma is affecting your worldview. In a, let's just say with a gay couple, to males, what we're going to really look at is who's the leader. Because like what I see with relationships in general, there are the relationships where one person's a leader and one person's a follower. And depending on the healthy mentality of the leader, that type of relationship can be very fruitful, right? It can be very rewarding. But we got to get into all the other stuff because those relationships aren't going to be looking for help that much. So we're going to be looking into the relationships that end up in a little bit of trouble because in the model that I just presented with the leader and the follower, if the leader is insecure or some kind of behavior that unstables the relationship rather than making it stable, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So this is where we need to be aware of things. This is the point of this podcast is I'm going to introduce something that I thought up, which I call the friction matrix. Okay. So for example, the matrix is just a spreadsheet and the spreadsheet has various questions on there that both members of the relationship take. So here's a good one. Let's say you're both, your political views are opposite in the context of Republican versus Democrat. Okay. Depending on how do you word this? You have the garden variety Republican, the garden variety Democrat, which are, they take it seriously, but they're not drinking the Kool-Aid. They're not all in, whereas the party can do no wrong. And then you have the Democrat or Republican that no matter what happens, they still vote their party. So what we want to do here is we want to identify. So first of all, in the questionnaire, you would see which political party do you most align with. And it'll be Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, whatever. And then we're going to look at the answers from both partners and see if there's a conflict there. Now, if you're both centrist or center left, center right, that's not going to be that big a deal. You're not going to have too much friction points in this space. But if you're a hardcore leftist and a hardcore rightist, that's going to be a huge friction generator. And so what we do is we add up the points, and the higher your point value, the more you guys have to be very, very careful about what you talk about. Because if you can't talk about politics, right, if you're both that far apart, then you shouldn't talk about politics together. That's the kind of things I'm talking about. These are the kind of things that will help your relationship. Or you can have a basic guidelines in place where if the topic of politics comes up, the moment one of you gets passionate, it's probably time to stop talking about politics and change the subject. That's where I'm going. These are like practical issues or practical guidelines so that you don't have a big pile of resentment and a big pile of contempt because of these little things, right? So contempt and resentment build over time in a relationship. The farther apart you both are in your worldview, the more it will add to your friction pile. There'll be think of like when you start a fire in a fireplace and you have to put all the sawdust and different items in there to get that fire going. So what we're going to point out here is the friction matrix is a comparison to how big your pile of kindling is, okay? So what you don't want to have is a cup of gasoline in there And when you strike the match, whoosh, that's what the friction matrix is for, is to help you deal with that pile of combustible material that can cause a fight. And usually they cause fights that come out of nowhere. It's like everything's fine, you're having a good day, and then bam, you're in a fight. And that should be hard to do. You shouldn't be able to get into a fight that easily. But if you are in a fight that easily, that means that your pile of kindling is big. And we want to make sure that you take as much of that kindling out of there as possible, because you don't want a fire to start. This is like sort of Damocles kind of stuff. You want a rope holding that sword, not a hair. So that's the point of it. And the point of the questions is to figure out how closely aligned your worldview is with your partner, and where it's not aligned, because it's not a usual thing for both people to be very close in worldview. I mean, it depends on how you met, right? If you guys meet in a politics club or something like that, then you're probably going to be more aligned than not. But if you meet on a dating app or, any kind of, like, if, your friends of yours set you up with someone else, it's going to be hard to have any idea how close you are or not. And let's say you're getting set up and your good friends think you're perfect for each other. And so they set up a dinner and you guys hang out. You are not going to learn enough about this person other than subconscious attraction, because the first time you meet somebody, it's your subconscious is doing all the meddling. And we're going to get into this point here because this is important, right? So I'm taking the influence of Dr. Harville Hendricks and Dr. Kelly LaKelly Hunt and their work in finding the love you deserve. They have other books, but that's the one that starts it all off. They have a very, I think, when I heard their explanation of how it works, it resonated with me. So I think they've got it pretty dialed in. It feels very correct. And how that works is you take your complex trauma from childhood. Now, I'm adding some stuff in here because they didn't talk about complex trauma. I think they wrote the book before that term was being used. So, but that's what they're talking about. They talk about attachment styles and different things. The crux of the work is that your attraction to another person is more subconscious than anything else. Now, you might think you have a list of things you want and you've done a careful analysis of what your perfect partner would look like and all that stuff. And that is helpful exercise. Everyone should do that if they're not already in a relationship, help guide their choices in the pursuit of a relationship. But the key here is every item of complex trauma you pick up in your childhood, your subconscious has put a check mark next to it. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to heal that. It's going to make sure that you're attracted to someone that's going to stir up your trauma. It's on purpose. Now, most of us don't know that. I spent, the first 20 years of my life not realizing this, and I would get into the same relationship pattern over and over again. And that's because my issues are stirring up her trauma and her issues are stirring up my trauma. And it turns, each relationship would kind of evolve and then devolve in a very similar pattern. And I never could figure out why. So in my 20s, of course, I thought all women were crazy. That's how it works, right? First, you blame everything else. Then you start to, if you're paying attention, if you have some basis of self-knowledge, you are seriously going to figure out that something you're doing is wrong. I hope you do, because if you don't figure that out, you're going to have a hard life. You're going to be in the same painful relationship over and over again, because the point of it is you're supposed to learn. You're supposed to work on your deficiencies, and that would say your human deficiencies. For example, how are your communication skills? How are your negotiation skills? All those things, in order to lead a positive life where you have a chance at having no regrets when you get to the end, you need those skills. You need emotional intelligence. You need logic intelligence. You need communication skills. You need to be able to explain how you see things so that other people understand it. Because if you can't make other people understand how you see things, you're going to have a problem in life in general. So these skills are vital. They're vital especially in a relationship with a couple. When we look at it, we're going to look at how Hendricks and Hunt break this out, right? We're going to show that, you're going to get attracted, and they call it the imago match, which is a tricky term. Their explanation is like a reasonable facsimile of your caregivers. So it could be a composite of your mom and your dad. And if you had brothers and sisters, they'll be rolled in there too. The romantic partner you're interested in will have elements of those caregivers, and you will have this hidden attraction to them so that you can reach your final form. And if you know that going into a relationship that your partner is going to stir up trouble and you're going to stir up trouble for them, you guys can be mindful of it. And when it happens, you can have a better structure around discussions for when it happens, because it is going to happen. What you don't want to happen is your partner starts pushing your buttons and you don't say anything. And then that's when the resentment starts building. So the key here is you have to be very comfortable bringing up issues that are making you feel annoyed, and you have to bring it up soon, because if you don't, you're actually part of the problem too. So this other partner is doing something, whatever, pick something stupid, like they're leaving the cap off the toothpaste. I don't know, right? It's the little things that bring the friction coefficient up. And then the reason I talk about the friction matrix is because that's the kindling that's sitting there. So every line item where you have big points added to your friction matrix, that could be a cup of gasoline instead of a pile of sawdust. And the difference there is, okay, so it's the little things that start the problem. So like the toothpaste thing, right? So let's say, a month goes by and the partner that really has an issue with that, leaving the cap off, maybe they mention something, hey, could you put the cap on the toothpaste, right? And it's not important to that person. So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, whatever. This is how it starts. So a week goes by and partner A, that the cap is important to them, they keep seeing that cap and then they get frustrated. Now, what happens is, depending on the accelerant that you have at the core of your relationship, that toothpaste cap could lead to a level 10 fight, even though it's just a toothpaste cap. The one person is really trying to, let's say they're not trying, right? Let's do it that way. It's just, they're annoying to them. They'd rather throw the cap away than to be nagged about the cap. So then they kind of are a little passive aggressive, maybe sometimes. Sometimes they legitimately forget, and sometimes they're just like, meh, I'm not putting that cap on, right? You know what I'm talking about. That happens to everybody. So we have to factor that in, right? Because I can't tell you in my 20s how many times I got in this big fight over what I thought was ridiculous. Well, it wasn't about the fight. I mean, it wasn't about that issue. It's not about the toothpaste cap. It's about your imago match. It's about your reasonable copy to what your caregivers were. Whatever trauma they gave you, that trauma goes into your relationships. As we all march down this path to healthiness, right? As we heal our worldview, it'll be better and better. You'll have less and less frivolous altercations with anyone. So we want to make sure that you are aware of all these things, because it's the unknown that really sneaks up on you and then kicks your butt. That is universal. If you know that, let's say you're in a relationship with someone and you just are the opposites, right? You know the old thing, the opposites attract. Sure they do. They do, because your opposite is going to challenge you to get better at communication and get better at negotiation and get better at relax. Well, one side is going to need to relax a lot and the other side is going to need to care a lot more than they do. You're trying to balance out. You're trying to balance out yourself as a human being. When it's appropriate to use logic, you use logic. When it's appropriate to use emotion, you use emotion, etc. You got to be a well-rounded person, right? So here's a sidebar for a second, but if you spend the time to learn about who you are, and you think of a yin and yang symbol, right? The white and black and the dots. It's a symbol of Taoism. But think of that symbol. Now, everybody looks at that symbol, and that symbol is drawn in perfect balance. The white side and the black side are the same. But what you really need to realize is that if you were to draw your symbol on a piece of paper, it would not be in balance. Most people, it takes a lifetime for them to get that symbol of their own self into balance, especially if they're not trying. It'll be out of balance. It could get worse. It could grow in a bad way. So let's say you're balanced and you come into a relationship with a partner that is balanced. Well, then your relationship should find balance fairly easily because you have all the prerequisite skills needed to make the relationship work. Because you have to compromise. You have to do things. Sometimes you put your partner in front of you and sometimes you're in front of them. And hopefully things are balanced out enough that that's not very often. But it happens, right? Especially when you're young and you don't have a lot of income. Your discretionary income is low. Well, in that model, for sure, you are going to have to, take turns what money is getting spent on. You guys have to have a plan for that. That's a big friction generator, by the way, is if you guys have poor planning in place for how the finances are going to work and all of those things, you're in big trouble. The stat used to be that most relationships that fail because of financial issues. So you don't want to go into that half-ass. You guys have to have a plan and you guys have to be on the same page and you have to stick to that plan. Otherwise, it's going to end bad for you. Let's just put that down in strong terms. If you want to keep your relationship going, you better have a plan for how the finances are going to work. And it better be fair. Like, you don't want to get in the trap of, well, I make more than the other person does, so I get more say. Stay out of that trap, man. That's a problem trap. But if the other partner that's not making as much is taking advantage of it, I get it. You're going to have to wade through that one carefully. But if you're the one making more, then you better watch out for that one because that will clearly cause massive resentment if you're not careful. So the whole point of this episode is to forecast where the problem spots are in your relationship and make a basic plan so that when you guys start to feel that you're stuck in a fight, that you don't stay there long. We'll talk about those kind of things later, but so the friction. So first piece, right? So let me circle around here and do a breakout one more time. So first, we identify the matrix, right? We identify Republican, Democrat, Christian, atheist, whatever. We go through the whole thing and we add up the score. The higher your number, the more you have to be careful because the higher your number, if you have a high number, that's the cup of gasoline that you're starting with. And gasoline is the right term because it's very volatile. Like one little spark and poof, you're in a fight. And because it's gasoline, it gets like level 10 in minutes, sometimes even seconds. You don't have much time if you're sitting on top of a cup of gasoline. And if you are sitting on top of a cup of gasoline, now you have a chance to do self-knowledge work to try to fix that. Because the point of healing your worldview is to get the subjective stuff out of your way so that it doesn't control your life. We want to be as close to reality as possible. And that is how we do it. So you put this all in conjunction, and it's even a good thing. Sometimes in a relationship, you can make faster headway than when you're doing this work by yourself because you have that partner that you love, you care for. So it makes you a more agreeable person around them. And when they're causing you to feel frustration, then you get to talk about it. Like the whole point of this is you guys have a plan in place so that you can talk through these items and learn how not to get in a fight. That's what you're shooting for. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to that if your partner's annoying you, that you realize, oh, they're annoying me. And secondly, that you don't escalate yourself. So that's the point of a healthy relationship. If you can have those guardrails in place, you're going to have a great relationship. It's going to be wonderful. You're going to have a friend and a lover. Sky's the limit on that because it's easier to get through this life when you're not alone. That's absolutely true. The friction matrix is vital. So where were we? We were talking about if you have that cup of gasoline, then you have to be very careful. It's like the moment you feel frustrated, you have to step back. That's the other point of this work that I'm doing is you need to be in tune with your lower level emotions, the ones that we all ignore. We ignore confusion, frustration, anxiety. We ignore all that stuff. And by the time, and then what happens is things blow up and we don't realize, we don't know why they blew up. We have no realization of, it's like all of a sudden, boom, you're in a fight. What happened? So that's where we get this foundation in place, right? So you understand all that. And so you can't solve a problem if you don't know what it is. That's fundamentals of my work. And so this is an attempt to at least have a better understanding of the items that are in your way. Because if they get out of your way, you'll have a much higher percentage of quality time than not. And that's where you want to be. That's the point of all this, is to, you see that those movies of like a Shaolin monk or something that can kill someone with one strike. They're so good at it. They're so dangerous and so deadly, but they're the ones that are the most pacifist. They're the ones that really work hard not to go there. And interestingly enough, like you see them in the movies all the time where they have this altercation with some belligerent jackass that won't stop bugging them. The whole time, everybody knows that monk could kill that person with one hit. So you see that it's hard to rattle that person once they get to that level. The insults and stuff, that's just kind of amusing. It's not really affecting them in a way where it would. What is it that it does, man? It doesn't even move the needle on if they're going to get in a fight here or not. It doesn't even affect them. It doesn't faze them. So that's the example of it from like that stereotype. So it's funny, but you want to be like that too. You want to get to the point where someone that's being belligerent, that you can keep yourself on an even keel. It's like you could escalate with them. You could get in a fight with them, but you're like, nah, I don't want to do that, right? It's a waste of my time. I'm not in that place. So the idea that you would get in a fight with this random person, becomes so absurd that you just don't even get agitated over it. That's where we want to be. We're trying to get to this stable baseline so that in all things we are our authentic self. And that's a great place to be. So if your relationship is sitting on top of gasoline, now you know that it's on top of gasoline, and you can, now being made aware of that position, you can work to get that gasoline out from under you. Whether it be you don't talk about politics, whether you both challenge each other and, change your worldview. It's all those things. We are in this space because we don't want that to happen to us. We don't want to be stuck there. And if you're mindful of it, it'll be harder for you to get stuck there. See what I mean? And this is a good thing. So the matrix. Now, as you attempt to focus on that gasoline starting point, your lives will get better just knowing it's gasoline. When you have, like, let's say you had a cup of gasoline in your hand, well, everybody's very aware and very alert to how dangerous that gasoline is. Most people are vigilant when they have that in their hand. Like, you're not going to go around any kind of spark or whatever. You know what's going to happen if you do that. You're going to have a bad time. That's the same thing here. So when I want to continue in the politics vein, that in the politics vein, you know that the moment politics comes up, you guys should not engage. If you're both on the same side, then fine, talk about politics all you want. But if you're not, then tread lightly. Same with Christian atheists. Same with all of the opposites, socialist, capitalist, all the things. And you can just realize the imago is in there. Your buttons are going to get pushed, and that's okay. That's part of the point, is your buttons are going to get pushed, and your job is to work through that event. So friction matrix, reaching harmony and balance in your relationship requires reaching harmony and balance in yourself. You are going to have a plan for finances, especially if something goes wrong. What we want to do is we want to make sure that if something goes wrong, let's say one of you gets your hours cut or loses their job or whatever, that happens all the time, especially if the economy's not good. So what are you going to do in that case? I know these conversations are difficult, but you only need to spend, half an hour mapping it out, right? What are we going to do if this happens? It's a simple thing. Just the idea that you brought it up and you discussed it a little bit is very helpful. That's the point. It's the relationship that's kind of flying by the seat of their pants that are more susceptible to chaos. If you have basic plans on a few things, then the chaos you experience is going to be lower just because. Nothing worse than when something bad happens and instead of solving the problem, you two are fighting with each other, right? Which is just making the actual problem that you're in that much worse. These are all these strategies. These are simple strategies. They sound simple, and these will help you in your job. Whatever you do for work, whether you run your own business or you're working for some company, you still need these skills. When it's time to figure out how to get a promotion, when it's time to figure out how to just get a raise, you need to be able to make the case. So these skills are vital. And that's why so many people are just lost. They don't have any skills, or whatever skills they have are dysfunctional in nature, which makes things worse. Like, I can't imagine, I'm going to pick on the woke here because they're so easily offended. I cannot imagine, and let's put the church lady in there too, the hyper religious type that's also easily offended if they see that you're not conforming to the Bible. They are easily offended as well. I can't imagine living my life where I'm that easily affected by anyone that's around me. That would be terrible. You want to be in the point where you can see these people acting out, but it doesn't affect you. That's what you want. That should not affect you. No one should be able to get you to level 10 after you do a good piece of this work. And it doesn't even take that long. 6 months to a year, you should be much harder to offend. Even if someone calls you a Nazi or something stupid like that, it should not offend you because you're like, well, you're not one. So that's the kind of thing we're looking to improve on. If you see, here's the beauty. If you lack the self-knowledge and someone calls you a Nazi or a racist or whatever, you're going to be defensive because even though you're not that, you're scared that if someone thinks you are that, bad things will happen. That's where defensive reactions really come from. So we're going to talk about that too. We're going to get into this part where, like, let's say someone calls you something you're not, whatever it is, rapist, white supremacist, all these things that are running around in 2024. If you know yourself, then when someone accuses you of something you didn't do, you're like, nope, sorry, that will not work in this case. You cannot manipulate me by accusing me of something I didn't do and get me emotional so that you can manipulate me. See where it goes? It always comes back to this part. And the self-knowledge, the more self-knowledge you have, the harder it is for someone to use that technique on you, especially your spouse. I'm talking from the male side of the perspective now, but that terrible thing that I've seen women do where they don't forget something for the entirety of the relationship. At the right moment, they are in an argument and they break that little factoid out and nail you with it. You have to either get pissed off about it and fight more, or you have to control yourself. It's dirty pool. I know both sides do that, but I mean, from my perspective, that's in my relationship history, that's the stuff I would see directed at me. So in your relationship, we're going to work this matrix out and it's going to be great. And if you are on the gasoline spectrum, sure, you need to know that. And especially before you have kids, like maybe you guys go through this friction matrix and you think, maybe we should break up before you're too deep into things, because you don't want this to happen once you have kids. That would be terrible. The friction matrix is vital to self-knowledge and the health of any relationship, be it romantic or other. Yeah. So let's keep this, let's be mindful of the friction matrix at all times, and your life will be better for it. And I will work on a questionnaire where we can go through it. It's not going to be like maybe 20 questions, something. It's not going to be too much, but even the sexual side of things, that is important because you hear about those stories all the time where one partner wants this and the other partner doesn't want to, and that causes a lot of friction as well. You just don't want to have to deal with these things. Life is hard enough without having to deal with this nonsense. So I think that's good for now. I wanted to thank you again for tuning in to the Heal Your Worldview podcast, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.